Adam Schiff, Pam Bondi. Those two names shouldn't collide in a moment this explosive, but what just unfolded in the Senate was more than a clash of personalities. It was a warning shot, a sign that something fundamental in American governance is slipping. Schiff didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He didn't try to score a soundbite. Instead, he issued a calm, devastating indictment of what happens when oversight is replaced with open hostility. And if you blinked, you might have missed how serious the message really was. Because this wasn't a senator complaining about rudeness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the advantages of being the junior most member of the committee on our side of the aisle is you get to listen to everything that's gone on before you during the course of a hearing. And I want to add my voice to my colleagues who have raised the concern about what happened yesterday. I listened to my ranking member ask a legitimate oversight question about the legal basis for troops to be rappelling from a Black Hawk helicopter for a military-style assault on an apartment building in a major city, the zip tying of children. What was the legal basis for this? I heard my ranking member ask that very simple question, that completely appropriate question. If that's not an appropriate oversight question, I don't know what an appropriate oversight question is. And the response was not just to refuse to answer the question, but it was to attack the character of the ranking member and to insult him. And then when it was Senator Whitehouse's turn to ask a question, he asked a very legitimate oversight question about a FBI undercover operation in which reportedly $50,000 was paid to the White House border czar prior to him becoming the White House border czar, but with the expectation that he would be helpful in arranging contracts when he became the White House border czar. What happened to the money? A perfectly legitimate oversight question. And rather than answer that question in a closed investigation, not an open investigation, but a closed investigation, she simply attacked Senator Whitehouse personally. And I heard another one of my colleagues ask what was the legal basis for blowing up ships in the Caribbean. Reportedly, the Justice Department wrote an opinion justifying blowing up ships in the Caribbean. A perfectly legitimate oversight question, and the response was another personal attack. These, what were apparently canned, written personal attacks in advance. I wouldn't bother with the attacks on me. I've grown all too accustomed to them for the last 8 years. But if members of this committee can't ask those serious questions and get serious answers, we can't do oversight. I'm new to this committee. I spent about a decade on the House Judiciary Committee. I never saw a hearing like this with a cabinet officer, and if I did and some Democratic cabinet officer were to personally attack each of my Republican colleagues, I would call for a stop to it. It would be disgraceful. And I understand the reluctance to criticize on your side of the aisle one of the Republican cabinet members. But if this becomes the template for future hearings, we won't be able to do any oversight, and things will just degenerate. These questions deserve answers. I would expect that if troops were rappelling from helicopters in any city, in any of your states, and hog-tying children, you would want to know the legal basis. And so would I. We are going to submit for the record in written form the questions that the Attorney General refused to answer. I would hope, Mr. Chairman, you would join us in submitting those questions. They will have a much better chance of being answered if you join us in submitting those questions. But I would hope also in the future that if a witness, rather than respond, simply attacks our members, that it be stopped. That the witness be instructed to either answer the question or to state why they're refusing to answer the question, but to refrain from personal attacks on the members of this committee. That would be my request. And Mr. Chairman, I'm really grateful to be on this committee. And I appreciate every interaction I've had with you. You have, in our personal interactions, always been eminently fair. If I didn't think that you were of that character, I wouldn't even raise this because there wouldn't be a point. But I would ask that we not have another hearing like that one, and that you join in our legitimate oversight requests. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thought that I set the decorum for a hearing, oversight hearing, when I said before we asked the director of the FBI any questions or any statements, that we should, both sides, treat each other with respect. And I even said to Patel, if you don't get a chance to answer your questions, I'll give you an opportunity after the senator's finished for a few minutes to respond whatever you didn't get a chance to say. And you know how that meeting turned out. And particularly from your side of the aisle, a lot of strong statements about the FBI director. Whether they were legitimate or not is beside the point. It didn't follow the decorum, and obviously the director of the FBI didn't follow the decorum. So I don't know what more I can do than plead with my people who are fellow senators to follow a certain decorum, and I assume it would be followed on the other side. I don't appreciate the insults that went to Democrat members, particularly where they were wrong, but after seeing how senators handled the FBI director, I guess I felt that just let the show go on the way the senators wanted to go on. And that's what developed as a result of it. That may be a weak excuse for what happened that day, but I thought things didn't work out the way I expected them to when the FBI director was here, and some of the people on your side of the aisle were some of the ones that were screaming and yelling and talking over the FBI director. Meeting adjourned.
It was a senator telling the country that the foundation of accountability is cracking right in front of us. What startled people watching wasn't just the exchange between Schiff and the committee chair. It was the fact that Schiff felt compelled to say any of this at all. In a chamber built on decorum, restraint, and respect for institutional roles, he stood up and described a hearing so chaotic, so dismissive of congressional authority, that it bordered on unprecedented. He pointed out what many viewers sensed but couldn't quite articulate. The breakdown we saw in that hearing wasn't accidental. It was a sign of something deeper, a shift in how power responds when questioned. And that shift should unsettle everyone. The moment that triggered Schiff's statement was simple on the surface. Senators asked basic oversight questions, and instead of answers, they were met with personal insults. But once you understand the gravity of the questions, the reaction becomes even more alarming. These weren't political zingers. They weren't partisan traps. They were legitimate, necessary questions about the legality of military-style tactics, the movement of money inside government operations, and secretive decisions that could affect national security. This is the kind of oversight Congress was designed to do. And yet the nominee sitting before the committee didn't treat those questions like responsibilities. She treated them like threats. The pattern was unmistakable. A senator asked why troops were rappelling from a helicopter into a residential neighborhood, a shocking situation by itself, and why children were zip-tied during the operation. A simple question: what was the legal authority for that? Instead of an explanation, the response was a personal jab aimed directly at the senator asking it. Then another member inquired about an undercover payment of $50,000 tied to a closed case. Again, no answer. Again, another personal attack. And then came the question about an alleged Justice Department opinion authorizing the destruction of vessels in the Caribbean. The nominee dismissed the substance entirely and instead launched into another insult. This wasn't improvisation. It didn't feel spontaneous. It felt rehearsed. Observers who followed the hearing closely said it appeared the nominee arrived with pre-scripted lines designed not to inform, but to belittle. Rumors suggest these talking points were prepared in advance, anticipating any question that touched on responsibility, legality, or transparency. And instead of addressing them, She pivoted to character attacks every single time. Schiff noticed it. Other senators noticed it. And viewers, especially those who pay attention to how government works, felt the shift immediately. In his remarks, Schiff pointed out something critical. Oversight only works when the executive branch respects Congress enough to answer questions. It doesn't require agreement. It doesn't require friendliness. It requires honesty. But in this hearing, honesty wasn't even on the table. She refused to answer even closed-case questions. No active investigation. No confidentiality concerns. Just refusal paired with insult. And Schiff knew exactly what that meant. If officials feel emboldened to attack senators instead of responding to them, it's no longer oversight. It's impunity. Schiff then drew on his decade of experience on the House Judiciary Committee. He'd seen tense hearings, heated hearings, even confrontational hearings. But what unfolded here was different. This wasn't the kind of back and forth that happens when tempers run high. This was systematic. It was structured. It was a deliberate deflection from accountability. And Schiff made it clear. If this becomes the standard for future hearings, Congress will no longer be capable of doing the very job the Constitution assigns to it. And this is where the moment becomes even more troubling. When Schiff finished, the committee chair responded, not by defending the senators who were attacked, not by insisting the nominee answer the questions, but by pointing to another hearing in which some Democratic senators had raised their voices. He suggested that since decorum had broken down in the past, he couldn't expect better behavior this time. That explanation didn't just miss the point. It revealed something darker, a resignation, an acceptance that standards no longer matter. If the chair of the committee treats personal attacks from a nominee as inevitable or understandable, then who exactly is in control of the room? This is where the shift becomes dangerous. If the person presiding over the hearing refuses to enforce basic standards, not political standards, not partisan standards, but the minimal expectation that a nominee must answer questions without insulting senators, then the balance of power is thrown off. The executive branch can walk into a hearing and do whatever it wants. And if that's the new normal, oversight is dead before the questions are even asked. But what makes this moment even more important is the substance behind the senators' questions. These weren't routine procedural inquiries. These were questions that touch on the most serious responsibilities of government. A helicopter assault in an American city is the kind of extreme measure that demands explanation. The zip tying of children demands explanation. The movement of $50,000 in an undercover operation demands explanation. The reported destruction of vessels demands explanation. These aren't small matters. They are events that should prompt investigative reports, legal reviews, perhaps even congressional actions. When those questions are dismissed with insults, it signals that the nominee didn't come prepared to answer for any of it. She came prepared to deflect. And that raises the question many viewers were left asking. What exactly was she trying to avoid? Although no one can say for sure, speculation online suggests that some of these topics might touch on controversial decisions within the department, decisions that might be embarrassing, unpopular, or difficult to justify publicly. And when the easiest option is to attack the questioner instead of answering the question, that's exactly what we saw unfold. Schiff understood this. He wasn't upset for himself. He made that clear. He was upset that his colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, were denied the answers they needed to do their jobs. He reminded the committee that oversight isn't optional. It's a constitutional obligation. And when the executive branch refuses to participate honestly in oversight, it's not just disrespectful, it's dangerous. Schiff wasn't making a partisan point. He was sounding an alarm that he also addressed something that viewers at home know instinctively. Once personal attacks become the default response to tough questions, every future hearing becomes meaningless. If a nominee can filibuster with insults, why would they ever provide information? Why would they ever admit mistakes? Why would they ever explain questionable decisions? The incentive becomes clear: deflect, attack, distract, survive the hearing, and walk away without accountability. That's not government. That's political theater. And Schiff called it out. He asked the chair to join in submitting written questions for the nominee to answer. He even appealed to the chair's sense of fairness, noting that in personal interactions, the chair had always been respectful and balanced. But the chair didn't commit. He didn't promise to protect the integrity of oversight. Instead, he fell back on excuses, pointing to past tensions as though they justified what happened. And that's when the deeper problem came into focus. If the chair won't defend the structure of oversight, and the nominee refuses to answer questions, and the attacks become normalized, then transparency becomes optional. And optional transparency is no transparency at all. This is why Schiff's statement matters so much. He wasn't just defending one hearing. He was defending the idea that truth still has a place in government, that senators are not props, that oversight is not a formality, and that democracy cannot function if those with power treat accountability like an inconvenience. Behind all of this lies a broader pattern. Across the government, critics have noticed a growing trend. When confronted with tough questions, officials respond not with information but with aggression. Instead of addressing concerns, they attack credibility. Instead of answering, they discredit the questioner. It's a strategy meant to shift attention, to weaken criticism, to paint oversight itself as illegitimate. And if that strategy spreads, if it becomes standard, then the only branch of government capable of questioning executive authority becomes powerless. That's the danger Schiff was pointing to. Not the insults, not the drama, the erosion. The slow, steady erosion of the norms that keep power in check. He reminded the room that oversight hearings aren't for show. They're where illegal actions get exposed, where misuse of public funds gets corrected, where questionable decisions get clarified. Without real oversight, mistakes go uncorrected, abuses go unchallenged, and power drifts further from accountability. That's why this hearing matters. Because it showed in real time what it looks like when oversight begins to die. Not with a scandal, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a nominee simply refusing to answer questions and a committee chair unwilling to insist she do so. The collapse doesn't come all at once. It comes through moments exactly like this. The Schiff's message wasn't dramatic for the sake of drama. It was a call to recognize just how fragile institutional norms have become. He didn't want this to become the template for future hearings, because once it does, the damage is almost impossible to reverse. Every time an official attacks instead of answers, it chips away at the legitimacy of the process. And those chips eventually form cracks. And those cracks become fractures. And soon, the entire structure struggles to stand. The real question is simple. If senators can no longer demand answers without being personally attacked, then who is actually holding government accountable? And if the answer is no one, then we have a much bigger problem than one contentious hearing. This moment should matter to every viewer who believes public office is supposed to serve the public. It should matter to anyone who wants transparency, honesty, or even basic competence in government. Because if hearings turn into performance pieces instead of avenues to uncover truth, then we're all left in the dark about what is being done with our laws, our security, and our tax dollars. If you believe oversight shouldn't be optional, if you believe officials should answer questions, not attack the people asking them, if you believe the Senate should be a place for accountability, not insults, then make sure you subscribe to the channel. Stay informed, stay engaged, and help keep the pressure on. Democracy only works when the people watching refuse to look away.